Greeley, Colorado, December 20th, 1984.
Hmm.
If you weren't there, I want you to really try to picture the time. This was small-town American suburbia,
Right.
a world where, the security systems are just those neighborhood watch signs.
The doors were often unlocked, yeah.
Exactly. The default setting was just high community trust.
And we're talking about an era and a place where the threat of, predatory violence felt so distant, it felt almost foreign. Jonelle Matthews, she was just 12 years old.
Oh, 7th grader.
A 7th grader, a member of the Franklin Middle School Honor Choir. And she had just finished her performance singing Jingle Bells. The world was gearing up for Christmas, and everything was.
Yeah.
It was predictable.
But that night, that safety, that predictability just vanished.
It was gone.
Janelle was dropped off at her empty house. The light went on, and then, just silence. She disappeared from 320 43rd Ave Court. And this was so much more than a local tragedy.
Oh, absolutely. It represented what a lot of people later called a catastrophic breach of the social contract. Not just for Greeley, but for small-town America everywhere.
And what we're looking at today is a case that's really defined by just staggering persistence. 35 years passed.
35 years. Jonelle was gone. The case went completely cold, yet a conviction was, in the end, secured. And what's so critical is how it was achieved. It wasn't through a clean DNA link or some last-minute confession.
Well,
It was done through a painstaking legal strategy built almost entirely on the perpetrator's own psychological failings.
okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Our mission for this deep dive is to analyze exactly how law enforcement successfully built a case using what they termed a mosaic.
A mosaic.
A mosaic of purely circumstantial evidence. We're talking about no direct witnesses, no definitive forensic link at the time of the crime, yet they managed to secure a conviction against Stephen Dana Pankey in the modern legal era.
And we're going to be focusing really intensely on two critical components that proved fatal to the killer. First, the strategic brilliance of a piece of holdback evidence, just a common garden rake.
Right.
And second, the bizarre self-incriminating behavior of the perpetrator who spent 3 decades just unable to let the narrative go.
It's just a stunning study in how time, rather than, erasing guilt or confusing the details, it actually sharpened the focus on the guilty party. It turned all these seemingly random details in this pathological obsession into a really powerful prosecutable narrative of accountability.
Yeah, we're going to see how the patience of law enforcement paid off in a way that, no one could have possibly predicted back in 1984.
So to truly grasp the shockwave this abduction sent, we have to establish the sociological climate of Greeley, Colorado in 1984. It was a mid-sized, an agricultural and residential hub in Weld County.
That's right. And for a lot of listeners today, especially those who grew up in this age of constant vigilance, the mindset of 1984 seems almost foreign.
It's a different universe.
It really was. The sources, they all paint a very specific picture of a community where social trust was just exceptionally high. This was the quintessential safe American heartland. People felt entirely comfortable letting their kids play unsupervised until dusk.
And more importantly, and this is directly relevant to this case, unaccompanied walks to and from school were completely the norm.
Oh, absolutely. Children were often very independent in their movements. The idea that a child could be taken from inside her own home, especially during the holidays when everything is supposed to feel safe and, close-knit. It was, as you said, it was literally unthinkable.
And that's why the impact was just so profound. And so immediate.
Exactly. The abduction didn't just cause momentary panic, it marked what people called the definitive end to an era of innocence. Those practices that really defined that generation kids walking home alone, playing freely all over town.
They just stopped.
They ceased almost overnight. And that's the massive, immediate, and lasting behavioral shift that trauma like this inflicts on a sheltered community. It was the intrusion of a dark, predatory reality into what had been a previously safe psychological space.
Okay, so let's nail down the critical timeline of that night, December 20th, 1984, because the window of opportunity for the abductor was just harrowingly narrow.
Incredibly narrow, but specific.
Jonelle was a 7th grader, and her evening started around 7 p.m. with the Franklin Middle School Honor Choir concert, where, as you said, she sang Jingle Bells.
And that concert detail is so important for the evidence that's recovered later.
Yeah.
It establishes exactly what she was wearing. A very specific blue vest and a red blouse or skirt. The tattered fragments of that exact outfit would eventually be found with her remains.
So that concert outfit became an unshakable point of reference.
Absolutely.
Now, her mother, Gloria, was out of town visiting a sick relative, and her father, Jim Matthews, was at a basketball game. So Jonelle got a ride home from Russ Ross, who was the father of her close friend Deanna Ross.
And this reliance on, communal networks, neighbors, friends, parents, that was entirely typical of the time and the neighborhood. So Ross drops her off at the residence, 320 43rd Avo Court, somewhere between 8000 and 8:15 p.m.
And this drop-off included a detail that really solidified the precise moment of her disappearance, didn't it?
It did. Ross, just following a common courtesy, he waited in his truck, he watched Jonelle unlock the door, go inside the house, and crucially, he saw her flick on the light.
And that light turning on was the signal to Ross that everything's fine.
Right. It confirmed her safe entry, so he drove away. That moment, around 8:15 p.m., is the final verified sighting of Jonelle Matthews alive.
Which allowed investigators and later the prosecution to determine that the critical window of abduction was confined to the hour right after that drop-off.
So roughly 8:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. She was alone for a very short period, which means the abductor either seized a quick, immediate opportunity or was already monitoring the situation.
And here's the internal evidence that really complicates the assumption of a simple snatch and grab at the doorway. Jonelle was alone during that window, but investigators found her shoes and her shawl near a heater in the family room.
Removed from her body.
Right, removed from her body.
This is such a powerful, silent piece of evidence. It suggests Jonelle wasn't taken the second she walked in the door. She had time to come in, settle in, take off her outer garments, maybe even turn on the heat, which implies a sense of relaxation.
It does.
And this led investigators to two pretty key and disturbing theories about how the abductor got in.
And what were those?
Well, either the abductor entered incredibly surreptitiously, maybe the garage door had been left open, or they came through an unlocked back entrance and they caught her completely by surprise while she was relaxing. Or, and this is perhaps even more chilling, Jonelle opened the door for someone she knew. Or at least someone who immediately disarmed her suspicion, leading her to relax before the violent act occurred. The location of that shawl and those shoes, it speaks volumes about a brief period of perceived safety.
The discovery phase began at 9:30 p.m., just an hour after Ross left, when Jim Matthews returned home from the basketball game. He saw a problem right away.
The garage door was open.
The garage door was open, which he noted was highly suspicious since it wasn't normally left that way.
So he goes inside, he calls out for Jonelle, but he gets no response. And it's not until 10:00 p.m. when her older sister Jennifer gets home confirming Jonelle's absence that sense of unease just solidifies into panic.
The shoes and shawl by the heater, combined with the open door and the silence, it just immediately escalated the situation.
And the police were notified shortly after 10:15 p.m. The investigation began, but that crucial 1-hour window meant the trail was already ice cold, leaving investigators with a very compromised scene.
So when investigators arrived and secured the scene, they found what must have been incredibly frustrating. As we said, no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, which really favors that theory of an open garage entry
Or a consensual entry. She opened the door.
Right, she answered the door. There was no internal struggle, no shattered glass, no blood, nothing inside the home to give them a clear pathway.
Exactly. The lack of struggle inside suggested efficiency, maybe surprise or coercion, which meant the search had to shift immediately to the periphery of the house. They realized the physical indicators of the crime weren't going to be on the furniture. They were going to be in the fresh snow outside.
And here's where it gets really interesting. They focused on the area near the windows, and they found a set of shoe prints, a definitive indicator that someone, likely the abductor, had been outside, maybe peering in or at least surveilling the home.
But the definitive clue, the clue that would be held secret for 35 years, was that these shoe prints were not left untouched.
No. This is the turning point of the entire investigation, even from night one.
It is. They observed clear signs of deliberate, sophisticated tampering. Someone had used a common garden rake to actively obliterate those shoe prints. The perpetrator hadn't just walked away, they'd taken the time to try and smooth over the fresh snow, attempting to erase their physical presence outside the victim's window.
Taking a tool from the victim's own garage, this shows an incredible, almost calculated shift in priority, doesn't it? After committing an abduction, an act of high stress, high violence, why risk pausing to cover your tracks when the priority should be to get away immediately?
It speaks volumes about the perpetrator's mindset. This was not a panicked, disorganized offender. This was someone demonstrating a high level of calculation and really remarkable forensic awareness right after committing a violent felony. They knew they left evidence, the shoe prints, and they proactively sought a tool to destroy that evidence.
And Jim Matthews confirmed the rake came right out of my garage.
That detail is chilling. It means the killer was not only organized, but they briefly operated within the family's private space, selected their tool, and then retreated.
So the Greeley police had this absolutely unique physical piece of evidence. The use of the Matthews' own rake to smooth over the snow.
Yeah.
And they made the strategic decision to keep it entirely secret.
This is the hallmark of sophisticated, long-term cold case investigation. The use of what's called holdback evidence. And we should define this properly for you. Holdback evidence is critical, non-public information, a specific fact that is only known to the victim, the investigators, and the perpetrator.
It's a strategic tool.
It's a strategic tool used specifically to verify confessions or, more importantly, to trap suspects decades later who claim intimate, non-public knowledge of the crime scene.
But that's a huge investigative gamble, isn't it?
Yeah.
The risk is that if you hold back information, you might miss a tip from the public that could have helped in the immediate search.
It is a massive trade-off, a huge one. The immediate risk is a loss of public engagement on that one specific detail. But the long-term gain, which proved invaluable here, is the creation of a definitive truth test. If the case goes cold, this piece of knowledge becomes a static, unchangeable marker. If anyone, 30 years later, mentions the rake, you know they were there. It serves as an uncrackable psychological trap.
It really proves that even as technology changes, an investigator's ability to keep critical facts secret is just paramount.
It is.
Early on, the investigation followed standard protocol, which, unfortunately, it often includes scrutinizing the immediate family. Jim Matthews and his wife were interviewed extensively.
But their accounts held up, and they were very quickly ruled out as suspects. So investigators moved on to known persons of interest, including a man named Norris Drake.
And Norris Drake was an early person of interest who, crucially, later passed away in 2007 without ever being charged.
Right. But the defense, decades later during Pankey's trial, they leveraged Drake heavily. They tried to cast suspicion on him to create reasonable doubt, even though the prosecution maintained there was, and I'm quoting, basically zero evidence linking Drake to the actual abduction or murder.
The pressure on the investigators during this period must have been just immense. This wasn't just a local story anymore. Jonelle's case was thrust onto the national stage almost immediately.
It really was a pivotal moment in American awareness of missing children. Jonelle became one of the very first children to be featured on the new milk carton campaign.
I remember that so clearly.
Yeah, it was a groundbreaking effort that plastered her image directly onto American kitchen tables. This visibility ensured the case remained alive in the public consciousness, and it generated thousands of tips, some useful, some not, that the Greeley Police Department was obligated to chase down for years and years.
That national attention, though, as painful as it must have been for the family, it maintained the pressure needed to keep the case from just being forgotten.
It did.
So as the police are chasing all these leads and the community is struggling to regain its footing, one local resident who seemed unconnected at the time began exhibiting behavior that evolved from just merely strange to profoundly suspicious.
Stephen Dana Pankey.
Even Dana Pankey.
Pankey is the central psychological element of this entire case, and he presents a classic, fascinating profile. He is a textbook example of what forensic psychologists and criminologists often refer to as an interjector.
Okay, let's elaborate on that, on the interjector phenomenon. What defines this behavior, and I guess why do they do it?
Well, the interjector is an individual, and statistically it is often the perpetrator who repeatedly and voluntarily inserts themselves into an ongoing investigation or the public narrative of a crime. Their behavior isn't rational. It's driven by a deep psychological need.
A need for what?
To monitor the progress, sometimes to feel powerful or superior to the authorities, sometimes just to satisfy a psychological need to be part of the story or feel recognized. They just cannot tolerate being outside the orbit of the crime they committed.
Before we delve into his decades of self-incrimination, let's establish Pankey's actual connection to the Matthews family back in 1984.
At the time, Pankey lived about 2 miles from the Matthews residence, so that put him in the general vicinity. But more importantly, he and the Matthews family were members of the same congregation, Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene, and had been since 1978.
So that suggests an overlapping social circle.
Exactly. And crucially, access to local information and proximity to the victim's environment.
Despite this, Pankey vehemently denied any connection. He claimed, and I'm quoting here, "Never met Jonelle, never met her family, didn't know she existed."
A denial that proved to be an initial lie. The indictment later alleged that Pankey had a specific, established pattern of predatory voyeurism.
Specific.
Specifically, watching children walk home from Franklin Middle School, Jonelle's school. So this established not just opportunity, but a potential motive for targeting a child in that specific area.
His actions immediately after the disappearance were equally suspicious, starting with his meticulously constructed alibi for the evening of December 20th, 1984.
He claimed he was home with his then-wife, packing for an early trip to Big Bear Lake, California, and that they left early the very next morning, December 21st. They returned 6 days later on December 26th.
The timing of this immediate departure, the morning after a child vanishes just down the road, it's suspicious on its face.
It is, but what happened next really sealed the behavioral red flags.
Which was the destruction of the car, right?
Yes. Upon his return from California, Pankey's primary vehicle, the one he drove on the trip, suspiciously went up in flames.
And was quickly scrapped.
Disposed of entirely.
Did he offer any kind of explanation for this? Because destroying the primary vehicle just days after a major crime is a textbook indicator of evidence disposal.
He offered vague claims, suggesting mechanical failure or an accident, but investigators immediately flagged this as an act of forensic countermeasure, an attempt to cover his tracks.
Now, so
The burning of the car destroys potential fibers, trace hairs, biological fluids, anything that might have linked him or the interior of that car to Jonelle during an abduction or transport. Just like using the rake to obliterate the shoe prints, burning the car demonstrated a consistent high degree of forensic awareness.
a key trait of an organized offender.
Exactly. But the truly bizarre and fatal element of Pankey's profile lies in his decades-long insistence on speaking publicly about the case. He actively sought the spotlight long before he was ever a serious suspect.
And this is where the interjector profile transitions into something else, right?
It transitions into leakage. And what's fascinating here is how he chose to broadcast this obsession. Pankey ran for governor of Idaho multiple times.
Right, as a Constitution Party candidate and then as a Republican.
And he used these political campaigns not to discuss policy, but as a megaphone to publicly talk about the Jonelle Matthews case.
Why would you use a political platform for a murder case conspiracy theory?
He was trying to reframe the narrative. He would frequently pivot during debates or interviews, claiming to be a victim of a vast police conspiracy, suggesting the Greeley police were actually responsible for the murder in some kind of cover-up.
So he tried to frame himself as the persecuted truth-teller who knew too much.
But in doing so, he inevitably engaged in what investigators call leakage.
And leakage just means he released information that only the killer would know.
Exactly. It's the subconscious release of crucial, intimate knowledge that validates guilt. The psychological pressure of keeping the secret was so immense that he had to externalize it, even if he framed it within a conspiracy theory. He just couldn't handle the silence.
And the detail he leaked, the specific, most crucial secret the police had guarded for 35 years.
It was the rake.
The rake.
Pankey explicitly mentioned the use of a garden rake to obliterate evidence near the house in various communications, including testimony and public statements going back years. And remember, the police had never released that detail to the public. It was their ultimate truth test.
So that knowledge was the confirmation police needed to move from just suspicion to an indictment, even without DNA. An innocent, obsessed true crime follower wouldn't have known about the rake.
No way. The prosecutor's office rightly classified this as the ultimate leakage. His years of ranting, his political grandstanding, his attempt to insert himself into the conspiracy narrative, all of that became the primary non-physical evidence against him.
And had he simply stayed quiet?
The case likely would have remained cold. His own behavior provided the final necessary pillar for the prosecution's case.
For 35 years, the Matthews family lived in this agonizing limbo without knowing what happened or where Jonelle was. And that silence was just shattered abruptly in the summer of 2019.
The date was July 24, 2019, nearly 35 years to the day after her disappearance. And the location of the discovery is a testament to the sheer, almost unbelievable serendipity involved.
Where exactly were the remains found?
They were found in a rural, unincorporated area of Weld County, about 15 miles from the Matthews home. A construction crew was excavating a route for a new oil and gas pipeline when they struck something unexpected.
Human remains.
Human skeletal
It's
remains.
just, it's a pure accident.
Yeah.
Had the route for that pipeline been shifted by 20 feet, she might still be missing today.
Absolutely. It really highlights how much cold cases sometimes rely on just sheer chance. The remains were discovered wrapped in a white bedsheet, which indicated the body had been deliberately concealed and transported, not just hastily dumped.
And the skeletal elements were recovered carefully.
They were noted as being admixed with abundant dirt and debris because of, 3.5 decades in the soil.
So once they were recovered, the immediate priority was identification. Given how much time had passed, what evidence was even usable for a positive ID?
Fortunately, the Weld County Coroner's Office had excellent initial records, and the skeletal remains were in a condition to be analyzed. They used forensic odontology dental records and, crucially, records detailing her orthodonture to make a definitive positive identification.
Jonelle Matthews.
Jonelle Matthews. The skull and mandible were largely intact, which not only helped with the identification, but it also proved vital for determining the cause of death.
And the clothing confirmed the tragic timeline, right? It linked the remains directly back to that December night.
It did. The recovery of tattered red and blue-colored clothing fragments matched the exact description of the outfit Jonelle wore during her Christmas concert. It provided a stark visual link back to that moment. Ross saw her turn on the light at 8:15 p.m. on December 20th, 1984.
The final, grim piece of forensic evidence was determining the cause and manner of death after 35 years.
The autopsy was conclusive. The cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the head.
A single gunshot wound.
The forensic pathologist determined the wound was specifically located in the forehead area, meaning it was a direct shot.
And that specific location, the forehead, suggests a cold, deliberate action, doesn't it?
It does. It suggested an execution-style killing, which is a chilling manner of death. It implies control and deliberation on the part of the killer, and this finding was vital because it allowed the indictment to make a direct connection back to Stephen Pankey.
How so?
Well, the source material confirmed that Pankey owned a firearm back in 1984. So even without finding the actual murder weapon, the manner of death and the type of wound linked him to the means used, confirming the manner of death was a homicide. This was another essential piece in that mosaic of circumstantial evidence.
So with the body found, the cause of death established, and the suspect already having incriminated himself with his knowledge of the rake, the Weld County District Attorney's Office moved decisively.
They did. They secured a grand jury indictment against Stephen Pankey in October of 2020. It was on 4 primary counts, including first-degree murder, both after deliberation, and felony murder, and second-degree kidnapping.
And this indictment immediately set up the defining legal challenge of the entire case. This is why it's such a critical study for modern cold case law.
Oh, absolutely. Despite recovering the body, 35 years in the earth, and the perpetrator's own forensic countermeasures like burning the garment, there was no DNA evidence.
Zero.
No DNA evidence linking Pankey to the remains, the bedsheet, or the original crime scene.
So the prosecution was forced to forego the modern expectation of biological evidence entirely and just rely on context, behavior, and circumstantial weight.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is the sheer audacity and complexity of the prosecution's mosaic strategy. They knew they couldn't rely on one smoking gun. They had to rely entirely on the cumulative weight of circumstantial evidence.
Stacking up so many interconnected improbabilities that the jury would have no reasonable alternative but guilt?
That was the strategy. We don't have DNA, but we have his guilty knowledge. The rake. We have his opportunity proximity, his actions, the car burning, the immediate departure, and his behavior, 35 years of obsessive self-insertion.
Pankey's defense team, they realized the stakes and immediately moved for a change of venue, arguing that the intense, decades-long media coverage in Weld County made a fair trial impossible.
That motion was ultimately denied, and the case proceeded to the first trial in November of 2021, which really became a battle of competing character narratives. And the pressure was immense because if the jury couldn't bridge that gap between circumstantial evidence and modern forensic expectations, the case was lost.
The prosecution argued Pankey was a calculating cold killer who watched children. So how did the defense counter a narrative built on 3 decades of just bizarre behavior?
Their narrative was clever, if deeply cynical. They framed Pankey as a sad, pathetic, annoying oddball, afflicted with mental health issues. They even claimed he suffered from Asperger's syndrome.
So they argued his obsession was pathological but not criminal.
Exactly. They said his obsession with the Matthews case was driven by this almost delusional desire to be a true crime junkie or false informant, but not actual guilt.
Which led to the defense's famous, pithy quote that really defined that first trial.
Yes. The defense lawyer stated, "Jerk, guilty as charged, murderer, not guilty." They tried to convince the jury that while Pankey was certainly an eccentric, unreliable, and even annoying man, being a pathological liar does not automatically make you a murderer.
And that first jury, they ended up hanging on the major charges, murder and kidnapping, which resulted in a mistrial. What was the internal split there?
Well, interviews with the jurors afterwards provided essential insight. They confirmed a deep split, which really shows the power of the CSI effect.
Right.
Some found the weight of the circumstantial mosaic overwhelming, and they believed he was guilty. But a significant number could not reconcile the lack of biological DNA evidence with the gravity of a murder charge. They clung to the possibility that Pankey was just a severe pathological liar who coincidentally stumbled upon the rake detail.
But importantly, the jury did convict him of false reporting to authorities.
Yes, and that validated the prosecution's core claim that he was actively lying and intentionally misleading police.
So the prosecution had a strong signal. The jury believed Pankey was a liar, they just weren't entirely convinced he was the killer. So they moved to retrial in October 2022. What was their strategic adjustment?
They adjusted their focus significantly. They moved away from arguing about his personality flaws, they didn't need to prove he was a jerk, and focused solely on the impossibility of coincidence. They streamlined the presentation of the 5 pillars of evidence, forcing the jury to confront the combined weight.
Could an innocent man truly share Pankey's proximity, his vehicle destruction, his immediate departure, and his specific privileged knowledge of the rake? The odds were just astronomical.
Right. And the biggest gamble in the retrial, and perhaps the turning point of the whole case, was Pankey's decision to take the stand in his own defense. In cold cases like this, the suspect testifying is almost always a massive risk.
And it was a strategic disaster for the defense.
A total disaster. Pankey's testimony was described by observers as rambling, hard to follow, irrelevant, and just entirely head-scratching.
And while he emphatically denied the murder, he said never happened. When asked directly if Jonelle begged for her life, his credibility was already fatally compromised.
It was. He openly admitted to being a liar in other contexts, and he tried to minimize the significance of his previous fabrications. And this admission just played perfectly into the prosecution's hands.
They just argued. Why should the jury believe his denial of murder when he has openly admitted to deceiving everyone about everything else?
His testimony provided the final piece of evidence needed to completely dismantle the defense's entire narrative.
So the second jury returned their verdict on October 31st, 2022. It was a nuanced decision reflecting some careful deliberation on the complex charges.
It really was. They found him not guilty of murder in the first degree after deliberation. And this is key. It means they couldn't confirm that he had a clear, pre-planned intention to kill her before he abducted her. They couldn't prove premeditation in the classical sense.
But the verdict that secured the conviction was the other charge.
Precisely. They found him guilty of felony murder and guilty of second-degree kidnapping.
Okay, so for our listeners who aren't legal experts, can you break down the distinction between felony murder and murder after deliberation, and why that distinction was the crucial win for the prosecution?
Yeah, this is fundamental to modern criminal law. Murder after deliberation requires proof that the defendant planned and intended to kill the victim.
But felony murder is different.
It's a separate category. Under Colorado law, if a death occurs during the commission of a dangerous felony, in this case second-degree kidnapping, the perpetrator is automatically guilty of first-degree murder, regardless of whether they intended to kill the victim from the start.
So the jury essentially concluded, we may not know exactly when he decided to pull the trigger, but we are absolutely certain he kidnapped her and her death occurred during that kidnapping.
Exactly. And this allowed the jury to reconcile the lack of clear, proven pre-planning with the fact that he was demonstrably responsible for her death while holding her captive. The kidnapping was the foundation, and the death that occurred during that felony triggered the first-degree charge.
And ultimately, Steve Pankey was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 20 years.
Given his age, 71 at sentencing, and the current state of parole for violent crimes, this is effectively a life sentence. Justice, though delayed nearly 4 decades, was finally delivered.
So what does this all mean? The conviction of Stephen Pankey, without the benefit of a single biological forensic link like DNA, is a pivotal case study in the modern legal landscape. It's a massive win for cold case investigators everywhere.
It is the definitive proof that a well-constructed mosaic of circumstantial evidence can successfully overcome the jury expectation that every case must be solved by high-tech forensics, what we all call the CSI effect.
Right.
The prosecution demonstrated that behavioral evidence and guilty knowledge are just as powerful, if not more powerful, than degraded trace DNA.
And the core of that strategy, as you mentioned, was the principle of interconnected improbabilities. We need to really emphasize that for you, the listener.
This principle forces the jury to stop looking at each piece of evidence in isolation and instead analyze the compound probability. You have to ask, what are the odds that an innocent, random resident of Greeley would 1. Live 2 miles from the victim and be noted for watching children from her specific school.
2. Leave town immediately the morning after the abduction.
3. Commit an extraordinary act of evidence disposal by destroying his vehicle immediately upon returning from that trip.
4. Possess specific, privileged knowledge of the unreleased rake evidence.
And 5. Obsessively insert himself into the investigation for 35 years, broadcasting intimate details of the crime.
When you stack all 5 of those points together, any chance of coincidence it vanishes. The collective weight becomes overwhelming.
Precisely. Any single one of those factors might be explained away by reasonable doubt, but the convergence of all 5 creates an airtight narrative. This approach, built on behavioral and psychological factors, allowed the prosecutor to tailor the argument to exploit psychological evidence over non-existent biological evidence.
Which brings us back to the psychology of self-destruction. It is just astonishing to realize that Pankey's actions after the crime were the primary evidence against him.
His desperate pathological need to be part of the story ultimately sealed his fate.
Had he stayed silent, had he never engaged with the media or run for office, had he kept the secret of the rake,
He likely would never have been charged. There was no physical evidence at the gravesite linking him to her. The indictment was built almost entirely on the statements he made and the behaviors he exhibited after the crime was committed.
which strongly validates the decades-long investigative strategy of just waiting for the suspect to talk themselves into a conviction.
It does. It shows the incredible patience required in cold case investigation. They didn't need to force a confession. They simply waited for the psychological pressure of the secret to become too much for the perpetrator to bear.
And finally, let's revisit the unsung hero of this case, the garden rake. That small, mundane detail, kept secret for so long, proved to be the unbreakable key.
The strategic value of the rake evidence just cannot be overstated. By withholding the specific detail that the footprints were actively raked over, investigators created a knowledge trap that remained perfectly viable despite the passage of time and all the changes in technology.
It's just a static, unchangeable truth test for 35 years.
The Greeley police's decision to keep that secret was a masterstroke of investigative tradecraft. It's the ultimate lesson in criminal investigation. While technology will inevitably evolve and forensic samples degrade, the investigator's ability to keep critical, non-public facts secret remains an essential, unshakable trap for the guilty.
This raises an important question then. How many cold cases today, those from the 1980s or 1990s, where biological DNA evidence is degraded or non-existent, rely entirely on one secret detail?
A piece of clothing, a specific action, an unusual fact held close by law enforcement since the beginning. That piece of secret knowledge is often a far more powerful weapon than any degraded forensic sample.
It's a remarkable journey of persistence and strategy. From the moment the light went on and then went out for Jonelle Matthews in 1984, through decades of agonizing silence and advocacy by her family, to the final, carefully reasoned verdict in 2022.
Yeah.
The resolution provided genuine, if painful, closure to a 38-year-old wound in the Greeley community.
The legal outcome confirmed precisely who killed Jonelle Matthews, and it established accountability through the nuanced application of felony murder law. However, the specific direct motive for the abduction, that may never be fully known.
Right, whether it was purely a crime of opportunity by a predator watching the school or a more complex pathological fixation developed through his church proximity and neighborhood surveillance.
We just don't know for sure. But the case proves beyond a doubt that while motives can remain mysterious, accountability is persistent.
Stephen Pankey was waiting for the world and the police to forget the details. Investigators were simply waiting for him to remember to forget the secret he carried.
And the ultimate lesson here is that the psychological weight of guilt is often a greater threat to the perpetrator than any evidence left at the scene. So, what other unsolved cases today might be waiting for the criminal to simply talk themselves or write themselves into a conviction? That innate, sometimes irresistible need for the perpetrator to be part of the story is often their most fatal flaw.
A truly stunning deep dive into persistence, forensic strategy, and the fatal psychology of a killer. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this complex mosaic of a case.